Salutations. In all languages, there are words with multiple meanings, and words which are commonly conflated even though their definitions differ in small ways. This can often lead to errors in communication. In philosophical discourse, it is important to be as precise as possible, so there are many words which have particular usages in philosophy that differ from their vernacular ones. A commonly cited example is the difference in the use of the word theory in common speech versus its use in science.
That's just a theory!
Today we are going to take a look at Book 5 of Aristotle's Metaphysics, in which he gives an account of some terms and their usages. So let's start at the beginning, or begin at the start.
Oh, that isn't smoke, it's steam.
That in something from which a process might first arise. For instance, a line or road has a start at either end, though each in a contrary direction. That from which, as an intrinsic part, something is primarily produced. Examples, the keel of a ship, or the foundation of a house. Also in animals, the heart, brain, or other parts are variously supposed to be of this kind. That from which, not as an intrinsic part, something is primarily produced, and from which it is natural for a process or change to originate. Examples, a child coming from its mother or father, or a fight arising from an argument. The common feature then of all principles is to be the primary origin of being, production, or cognition. And some principles are intrinsic, others external, so the nature and element are a principle, as also thinking and choice, substance and the final cause. There are many cases where the principle both of cognition and of process is the good or the beautiful. An intrinsic feature from which something is produced. For example, the bronze is the cause of the statue, the silver of the salver. Also, the kinds of such things are causes of them in this way. The form and template, which is the account of what it is to be that thing. Also, the kinds of form are causes in this way. Example, the proportion of 1 and 2, and at a more general level, number, are the cause of the octave. The source of the primary principle of change or stasis. For example, the man who deliberates is the cause of action, and the father is the cause of the child. In general, the producer is the cause of the product, and the changer of the thing changing. Cause as end. The end of something is what that thing is for. For example, the end of exercise is to be healthy. Why, we might ask, is this man walking? It is in order, replies the expert, to be healthy, and in so saying he reckons to have put his finger on the cause of the behaviour. Causes in this way are also all things which lie on the way to the end, when some other agent has initiated the process.
If you have a look, you will see the central elements.
The primary intrinsic component of something not being formally divisible into some other species of thing. The elements of speech, for instance, are the components of speech and the products of its final analysis, not being themselves further divisible into other speech elements differing in species from themselves. Were they to be further divided, their parts would be, like parts of water and water, of the same species, in contrast to the parts of the syllable, and by the same token the elements of bodies are said by their proponents to be the products of the final analysis of bodies, not themselves being further divisible into other elements differing in species. Whether such things be one or many, they are said to be elements. Similar too are the elements of geometrical proofs and of demonstrations in general. Primary demonstrations present in large number of demonstrations are said to be the elements of demonstrations, of this kind being primary syllogisms with their three terms and their middle term. Taking the term element from this usage, some also apply it to anything which, being single and small, is used for many purposes, so that what is small and simple and indivisible is also said to be an element. And this is why the most universal things are elements, in that each of them, being single and simple, is present in many things, either in all instances or in the largest possible number. Also, since what are called kinds are universal and indivisible, there being no account of them, they too are said by some to be elements. More so indeed than the differentia, since the kind is more universal. For whatever the differentia pertains, so too does the kind, whereas the kind can pertain in some cases without the differentia doing so. The common feature of these uses is that the element of each thing is its primary intrinsic component.
It's just my nature.
The production of things growing. This aspect is suggested by the affinity between nature and native. The intrinsic component of something growing from which its growth primarily proceeds. The intrinsic source of the primary process for each growing thing, just qua the growing thing that it is. The primary material from which some one of the things having natural being is either composed or produced. In this way, bronze is said to be the nature of a bronze statue and of bronze utensils, wood of wooden ones, and this also applies to the other cases, for which anything made of some such material the primary matter is conserved through the production. It is also in this way that people say that the elements of things having natural being are their nature. The suggestions range from fire, earth, air and water to something else similar, some selection of them, or all of them. The substance of things with natural being. One view, for instance, is that nature is primary composition. That is also why, for things with natural being or production, when that from which they have their natural being or production already exists, but they do not yet have their form or shape, we do not say that they have their nature. And something composed of both matter and form has natural being, such as the animals and their parts. Thus, primary material is nature, but so too is form and substance is also the end of the production.
You talking about that city or this city?
A causal contributor without which it is impossible for something to live. Examples: respiration and nutrition for an animal, which cannot have being without them. Preconditions of its being possible for good either to be or to be produced, or for evil being removed or eliminated. Examples: taking the medicine is necessary for not being ill, and a voyage to Ergena may be necessary to collect some money. The enforced and force. Whatever, in the face of drive and choice, conduces to impediment and prevention, for the enforced is said to be necessary, and necessity is thought to be something ineluctable. Is it not, after all, contrary to the process associated with choice and calculation? When something does not admit of being otherwise, we say that it is necessarily as it is. Indeed, it is from this use of necessary that all other accounts of the necessary are derived in one way or another. Demonstration is also something necessary, because a demonstration cannot go otherwise than it does, assuming that it is a demonstration simpliciter, and the cause of this lies with the primary premises, assuming that it is impossible for what the argument proceeds from to be otherwise than they are. For some things, the cause of their being necessary is something other than themselves, whereas for others, there is no such external cause, but rather they are themselves the necessary causes of other things being the case. So it is the simple that is primarily and fundamentally necessary. One by accident, one per se. Examples: choruscus and musicality, musical choruscus, musicality and justice, and musical and just choruscus. These are all said to be one by accident. In the case of justice and musicality, they are accidents of a single substance. In that of musicality and choruscus, one is an accident of the other. Similarly, in a way, the oneness of musical choruscus and choruscus. One of the two parts of one of these two conjuncts, viz. Musical, is an accident of the other conjunct, viz. Choruscus. And musical choruscus is one with just choruscus, because part of each of the two terms is an accident of the same thing. And this is the same if the accident is predicated of a kind or a universal. If, say, it was said that man is the same as musical man, this could either be because musicality is an accident of man, which is a single substance, or because both are accidents of some particular, such as choruscus. Of course, they could not both pertain to choruscus in the same way, rather man would pertain to him as his genus and as intrinsic to his substance, whereas musicality would pertain to him as a state or affection of his substance. Of things said to be one per se, some are so said by dint of being continuous. A faggot is one through its binding, timbers by their glue. A line too, if continuous and even if bent, is said to be one, and so are all bodily parts, such as a leg or arm, and of this group it is rather things continuous by nature than by art that are one. And something is said to be continuous if it has per se a single process and cannot be otherwise, and a process is single if it is indivisible, the indivisibility being temporal. Also, some things are numerically one, some formally, some generically, and some by analogy. Those things are numerically one whose matter is one. Those things are formally one whose account is one. Those things are generically one to which the same pattern of predication applies. And those things are one by analogy which are related as some further thing is to some yet further one. And the posterior unities always accompany the prior ones, so that any things that are numerically are also formally one, whereas not all things that are formally one are numerically one. And any things that are formally one are also generically one. whereas not all things that are generically one are formally one, but are one by analogy, even though not all things that are one by analogy are generically one. Accidental being, being per se. Accidental being. Examples. We may say that a just man is musical, that a man is musical, and that a musician is a man. This is exactly similar to saying that a musician builds, in that the builder has the accidental feature of being a musician, or if you prefer, the musician has the accidental feature of being a builder. In this context, to say that A is B indicates that B is an accidental feature of A. And this goes also for our cases of being. For when we say that a man is musical, or a musician is a man, or that a white man is a musician, or that the latter is white, what we are saying in the last two cases is that the same thing has both accidental features, whereas what we are saying in the first two cases is that something that is has an accidental feature. And to say that the musical is a man is to say that musicality is an accidental feature of a man. Indeed, in this way, it is also said that the not white has being, because the thing of which it is an accidental feature has being. So if A is said to be B, this is said either because both A and B are features of the same thing that has being, or because B is an accidental feature of A, and A has being, or because A has being and B, of which it is itself predicated, is an accidental feature of it. As for per se being, those things are said to have it which are revealed by the patterns of predication. There are as many ways of indicating being as there are fundamental ways of saying something, and since some predicates indicate what it is, some a quality, some a quantity, some a relation, some action or affection, some location and some time, for each of these being indicates the same thing. There is no difference between saying that a man is getting better and that a man gets better, or between saying that a man is walking or cutting and walks or cuts, and so on. Another use of being is to say that something is true, and another use of not being is to say that something is not true, but false. For instance, to assert that Socrates is musical is to assert that it is true that Socrates is musical, and to assert that Socrates is not white is to assert that it is true that Socrates is not white. Being and that which is indicate both what is potentially and what is actually, among the cases that we have reviewed. For we say both what potentially sees and what actually sees is seeing, and in the same vein we say both that what can use its knowledge is knowledgeable, and what is actually using it is knowledgeable. And it is the same with substances. We say that the Hermes is in the stone, and that the half line is in the line, and we say that corn is corn even when it is not ripe.
When I'm drinking? Yeah. When I'm drinking? No.
Difference. Things that are other while being the same something, and not only numerically, but either formally, or generically, or by analogy. Things of which the genus is other, also contraries and things having otherness in their substance. Opposite. Contradiction, contraries, relational terms, privation and condition, and the endpoints from and to which cases of production and destruction occur. Also features that cannot be simultaneously present in something that can have both of them. These are said to be opposites, either themselves or their counterparts. Grey, for instance, and white are not to be found pertaining simultaneously to the same thing, and this is because their components are opposites. Contrary. Things differing in genus which cannot simultaneously pertain to the same thing. The most widely differentiated things in the same genus. The most widely differentiated features pertaining to the same recipient, the most widely differentiated items in the domain of the same faculty, things between which the difference is greatest either simpliciter, or generically, or formally.
Come on, let's have a look.
On the assumption that there is some primary item and principle in each genus, certain things by dint of their being more proximate to some principle, as defined either simpliciter and by its nature, or with relation to something or in some location, or by some particular group. For instance, some things are prior in place, by being nearer either to some place defined in nature, such as the midpoint or the extreme, or to some arbitrary point, and what is further removed is posterior. Others are prior in time, by being, in some cases, further removed from the present time, as with past events, the Trojan War being thus prior to the Persian War, as being further removed from the present, and in others, by being nearer to the present, as with future events. The Nemean Games are prior to the Pythian Games, as being nearer to the present. Other things are prior in process, in that which is nearer to the primary source of process is prior, as a child is prior to a man. The primary source of process is a principle simpliciter. Other beings are prior in respect of potentiality. Whatever has an excess of potentiality, and is thus more potent, is prior. Also, prior and posterior by nature and substance, viz., prior things that can have being without posterior things, without the posterior being able to have being without the prior, to adopt Plato's distinction. So in a way, all things that are said to be prior and posterior are said so to be on the basis of this last account, given that some things can have being without others in respect of production, as a whole without its parts, others in respect of destruction, as a part without the whole, and this carries over to all cases.
Potatoes.
The principle of process and change, either in another thing or in the same thing qua other. The art, for instance, of building is not present in what is built, whereas with the art of medicine, it may be present in the person being healed, but not qua the person being healed. So what is a principle of process or change in this way is said to be a potentiality, whether in something else or in the thing itself qua something else. Another account is that a thing is potential if something else has a potentiality of this type over it, and another is that it is potential if it has the potentiality to change into something of whatever sort, whether for worse or better. Indeed, even what is destroyed is said to be potentially destructible, since it would not have been destroyed if it had no potential for it. And non-potentiality is a privation of potentiality and of the principle of the sort that has been stated. This is one way in which things are said to be non-potential, but there is another way in which things are said to be both potential and non-potential. Thus, the non-potential is that whose contrary is true of necessity. For instance, it is non-potential for the diagonal to be commensurate, because to say that it is a falsehood, of which not only is the contrary true, but it is necessary that the diagonal be incommensurate. So it is not just false, but necessarily false to say that it is commensurate. And contrary to this, the potential occurs when it is not necessary that the contrary is false. For example, it is potential that a man should be seated, since it is not false of necessity that he is not seated. So in one way, as we have said, the potential indicates what is not necessarily false, in another way what is true, and in another still what admits of being true. As the double stands to the half, and the threefold to the third. More generally, in the way that anything that is many times something stands to that thing divided many times, and in which what has an excess stands to that over which it has an excess. As what heats stands to what is heated, what cuts stands to what is cut, and, more generally, what produces to what is acted on. As what is measurable stands to the measure, what is knowledgeable to knowledge, and what is perceptible to perception.
I don't think he looks stupid. He's fine, Lyle. He's fine.
A quality in respect of which something admits of alteration, such as white and black, sweet and sour, heaviness and lightness, etc. Actualizations of the above, that is, when the alteration is actually occurring.
It's gone like an angel's kiss.
When something does not have one of the things that it is natural for things to have, even if it would not be natural for the thing in question to have it. For example, a plant is said to be deprived of eyes. When something that would naturally have a feature, either in itself or in its genus, does not in fact have it. For instance, a blind man and a mole, which are both deprived of sight, are so in a different way. The man relative to the features of a man, and the mole relative to the features of the genus.
Allosaurus had never seen such bullshit before.
Used of a false thing. On the one hand, either because it has not been assembled, or because it would be impossible for it to be assembled. Examples: the claim that the diagonal is commensurable, or the claim that you are seated. For of these one is always, the other sometimes, false, and it is in this way that these things do not have being. On the other hand, all things that do have being, but are by nature such that they appear either not to be of the sort of which they are, or to be things that do not have being. Examples: a drawing or a dream. These certainly are something, but not those things that they induce us to imagine. Things, then, are said in this way to be false, either by dint of their not themselves having being, or by dint of the fact that the appearance induced by them is of something that does not have being. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye. Of things said to be one per se, some are so said by dint of being... Hello? No, you've got the wrong number, sorry. Blimmin' heck.